Kelly has been a Methodist pastor for 43 years. The last 11 years he was pastor of the Paradise Valley United Methodist Church upon Lincoln. And he has served in many, many different things. As most of you know, to be a Methodist minister, you go to college for 4 years. Then you go to seminary for 3 years, and he went to St. Paul's United Methodist Seminary in Kansas City. But then Kelly went ahead, got a master's in family and child development, and then got a PhD in family life education. So this man is highly educated in all of these issues. And so besides being that, he retired a year ago from the Paradise Valley United Methodist Church 2 years ago. And then he has become the pastor to the UMOM New Day Centers homeless shelters. Now just kind of picture in your mind, if you know anything about Paradise Valley United Methodist Church, millionaires, people at the top of the social list. Now he is pastoring the homeless people at UMOM. And that's not to contrast anybody, except to just say that Kelly is that kind of man. So, Kelly will, besides this, he has 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, and he will be now speaking to us.
To go from Paradise Valley United Methodist to a homeless shelter really means God has a marvelous sense of humor. You may have heard the story of a little boy, 6 years of age. His brand new baby sister newly arrived in the home. Mom and Dad anxious about what that might mean in terms of things being rearranged. And so when Jimmy said that he wanted to go visit his baby sister in her bedroom, the baby asleep in the crib, Mom and Dad followed at a distance, concerned about how Jimmy was going to receive his baby sister. So they followed him and peeked around the corner and saw Jimmy reaching for his baby sister's hand and heard him say to her, "Sis, tell me what God looks like. I'm forgetting. Tell me what God looks like. I'm forgetting." Dennis Benson says that all of our children, newly arrived, are God's star children. All of our children, newly born, are God's star children. By that he means sent red hot from the very heart of God. When I was a young pastor, my daughters would say back in the covered wagon days, we talked about the ministry to the child. Somewhere in the middle then we began to talk about the ministry with the child. Now we talk about the ministry of the child. Children lead us in the capacity for awe, for wonder, and in trust. Major expressions of adult faith, don't you think? The point is that our children, newly born, don't have to be put right with God. They are already right with God. They are God's star children. Isn't that a given? No. As a young pastor, I took a 12-week clinical pastoral education program at Wesley Hospital in Wichita. After the training, my first night on call, awakened in the middle of the night by the charge nurse at the Children's Intensive Care Unit, who said there was a young couple there, young parents. They wanted a father. I told them that the chaplain on call was a Protestant chaplain, and they still want to see you. Their little boy, Stevie, 6 years of age, is gravely ill. Would you please come and see them? So I hurried down, and when I arrived, the parents' request was that I baptize their little boy, because they'd been told he might not make it through the night. And they said, our faith tradition teaches us that should he die and he's not baptized, he won't go to God. Stevie died. Later that morning, they decided he'd been bitten by a brown spider helping his granddad clean out the attic. That wasn't the time nor the place to get into a discussion of a theology of baptism. I went ahead and baptized Stevie, and there was opportunity for us to unwrap the different meanings of baptism later. God's star children, red hot from the very heart of God, precious to God. Recent developmental theorists, reflecting upon faith development, now are taking the position more and more that we don't have to give our little children faith. They already have it. They already have it. Our privilege and responsibility is to nurture it, to nurture what God has already given them. James Fowler, who did some of the early research on faith development, talked about 4 stages of faith. His labels are difficult to understand and interpret, so what I'm going to use are my responses to what I understand him to be saying, and I trust they're in keeping with Fowler. But Fowler says that the first stage of faith is dependent faith. Until it is personally owned, it is dependent upon others. Parents, grandparents, friends, family, church family. Okay? Not that we have to give them the faith, but for them to be consciously aware and to personally own it. Hear the difference? They have faith. The task now is to help them personally own it. And even at the shelter, I see little children with the gift of faith. Some children seem to be born with it. And I'll talk more about one of those little girls in a moment. So dependent faith. Until it is personally owned, it is dependent upon others. And then the second stage of faith, said Fowler, is independent faith. It's personally owned. And Fowler contends that often it has an obnoxious quality to it. If you had a really significant grace or faith conversion and it was filled with emotion for you, there was a tendency perhaps to think that everyone else ought to experience it the same way. And if they didn't, then maybe their faith wasn't as authentic. Ever remember going through something like that? The problem, says Fowler, is that most of the people in our culture never outgrow the independent faith stage. That's important because, says Fowler, the third stage of faith is interdependent. And that's where we begin to embrace the whole issue of diversity, of respect for different faith traditions, recognizing that we don't have all of the answers, we don't have the only true faith. We are dependent, interdependent, one upon the other in terms of our faith traditions. Fowler contends that only a small minority of people in our culture reach that interdependent faith stage. Now, Richard Rohr would say that's because many of us never move out of dualistic thinking. Dualistic thinking, either or, right or wrong. You have to be wrong in order for me to be right. There aren't any ambiguities. The alternative is polarity thinking, living with the ambiguities. There may be more than one answer to the question. We might just have to learn to live with the question. So part of our task as educators, parents, grandparents, is to help our children learn how to critically think. We used to do that at the supper table. Recalling a supper table gives you a clue where I'm from. But we would actually do some of the role playing and critical thinking over the dinner table, trying to help our children learn how to critically think. Isn't that a given in faith traditions? Absolutely not. There are some churches that don't want you to think. They'll tell you what you're supposed to believe. The final stage of faith, dependent, independent, interdependent, The final stage of faith, says Fowler, is inclusive faith. And he thinks a rare few reach that. A radical inclusiveness. And he pointed to Jesus, to Gandhi, as examples of inclusive faith, where everyone is included, no matter what. Now, children learn by what they see us doing more than by what they hear us saying. Children are concrete, operational. And so the whole task of modeling for them what we value becomes really important. And parent educators will say there are no neutral moments when it comes to parenting. Mercy sakes, no neutral moments? If something positive isn't happening, then it's negative. Oh my. So what is it that we model? And do we model the embracing of diversity? Do we model through faith tradition and family rituals some of the important aspects of faith? Now, having said all of that, I believe there's nothing more important for our children to know, to not just hear, but to know that there's nothing they could ever do that would cause us to no longer love them. We may not like them at a certain point, certainly may not like their behavior, but for them to know and to learn to trust that they are loved by us no matter what. There can be even a tough love in response to inappropriate behaviors, but we hang in and we hang on because of knowing how important it is for them to trust that we will always love them. Why is that important? Because the capacity to trust is vital to our having adult faith. In fact, Sam Keen says that faith is, at its core, trust. Let me close with a story about a little girl at the homeless shelter. I was seated in the chapel with two members of my ministry team. We pray with folk on Tuesday nights. We focus on healing, transforming prayer. The continuum of resources are already in place, but we're trying to, God would rather partner with us, would rather do it with us than for us or to us. And so what we're trying to help the residents do is to partner with God. Some come with faith, but some don't have it. So we've been praying with folk, and there was a break in the action. Little girl stuck her head through the side door and said, "Hi, what you doing?" And I said, "Well, we're praying for folk." And one of my team members said, "Would you like for us to pray for you?" And she said, "Sure." I said, "What's your name?" She said, "My name's Lisa, and I'm 6 years of age." I said, "Lisa, is your mommy out on the patio?" "Mm-hmm." "Well, why don't you go ask her if it's okay if we pray with you?" She said, "Okay." So she left, and she came back in a few moments, and she said, "Mom said it's fine." So we sat down in a circle, 3 adults, with Lisa, the first time we'd been in contact with each other. And she said, "Can we hold hands?" I said, "Sure." So I prayed, and one of the members of my team, who has amazing spiritual gifts, said that she had a vision of Lisa as I was praying for her. Lisa, as a young adult woman, bathed in God's light, and saw that as a sign of God's blessing for her in her young adult life, throughout her life. When we finished, Lisa said, "Thank you," and she left, and we were about ready to receive another person in to meet and pray with, and all of a sudden here comes Lisa with 6 of her friends. She's going to be an evangelist when she grows up. And Lisa said, "Would you pray with my friends?" And I said, "Sure, we'd love to." So there we were, 3 adults and 7 children in the circle, holding hands and praying for these children. Then the mama of 2 of the boys in the circle came looking, wondering where her sons were, and so Lisa invited her into the circle. And so we joined with Mama in the circle and said prayers. What's the point of that? Our children often lead us. Lisa's 6 years of age, already has the faith, and was actually teaching us in that. And God was reaching for her and bringing her into that house of prayer, not just for her sake, but for other children, residents on the campus.
Thank you. You can see why the church was always jammed when Trump was preaching. Now then, our next speaker is Siri Datar Singh. You can tell who he is. Siri is a retired attorney. He just told me he is on his way to England in a couple of days to be on a 3-month retreat, I think teaching also.
No, this is strictly meditating.
Strictly meditating. But Siri has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Wisconsin, and then he has a Juris Doctorate from St. Louis University School of Law. And so we're delighted, Siri, that you are here for the Sikh faith to share about prayers.
Good morning. My name is Siri Datar Singh. I'm affiliated with Guru Nanak Dwara, which is a Sikh temple here in downtown Phoenix. And Dr. Eppinger starts out, he says, how important is faith in your parenting? And from a central Sikh prayer, it says, the mother's prayer is that the child will remember God, which each and every breath for his whole life. Now that's it's a very expanded vision of what the child might become. And to put life onto that tree requires, in many instances, working from the roots. And so you attend to those roots by building values. There are issues that we all face, building self-esteem in the child, giving the child an experience, an environment where he can experience a God. But let me back up. Most Sikhs are from northern Punjab, and they make up a significant immigrant population here. Some of the Sikhs are native born. That's my circumstance. So I'm speaking to you from the point of view of somebody who was converted into Sikh religion about 40 years ago. It's been a while. And in a traditional Sikh environment, use the term of a closed environment. It was closed in the sense that it was culturally isolated for the most part in Punjab. It's the story of most immigrants. This is not unique. And it's a story of us all because we're coming from a previous historic epoch, which was much slower paced. We had well-stated values in our lives. The institution of home life was much more solidified. The role and the respect of women was much higher at a certain point in time. These were all true in the Punjabi community. In addition, we had an extended community, had a very strong community identity through most of its history, and it was based on strong traditions of respect, hospitality, kindness. There are many highly virtuous qualities there. There was what you might call the institution of the Santaji, which you find in many Eastern religions. Somebody who can manifest that level of superconsciousnly, an awareness such that his radiance, her radiance, can speak. And that child will have, we were talking about an example, will have a wonderful example. And that saintly person does not have to say very much. Their simple presence will pretty much explain all that needs to be done. Well, within this historical model, not only due to immigration, but due to the onslaught of modern times, the media, commercialization, bad examples of every variety. In many respects, we think of these as our enemy. They're our challenge for sure. This model of the closed society broke down. We're an open society, whether we like it or not. We talk about globalization. Yes, we're open. We talk about media. We're on the internet. Everything is available to everybody. So the question is, how do we address this new situation that we find ourselves into? And part of the answer is we take some of these institutions that have proven successful and we modify them so they're appropriate to a modern age and to a mentally active and challenged environment. One of the key elements to a closed society is it was based on form training. It was like a Montessori school. So you teach a child certain things and everybody's kind of doing the same thing, so they learn almost by osmosis. You don't have to teach a lot. You're not dependent so much on innovation, ingenuity. In this new environment, we find ourselves needing to go into the direction of spiritual experience. So how do you raise a child to have that capacity for spiritual experience? Many Christian organizations, they talk about charismatic Christianity. Maybe it's emotionally based, maybe it's meditationally based. But somehow, you have to give the child the taste of experience. One of the key elements in a traditional society was the mother. And from a Sikh perspective, we cannot say enough about the virtues of the mother and her role in the spiritual development of the child. The mother is basically the embodiment of God in terms of that small child. And, you know, we can send, if the women want to work, they, no doubt in an information age, are probably better than men at working. But to have men substitute for the mother is almost impossible, despite media hype in the other direction. I'm giving this to from a Sikh perspective. In the Sikh world, the child comes in on a prayer, and the prayer starts many months before the child actually comes into the environment. When the child's born, the mother is normally isolated from the outside world, and they'll have an attendant. So they're in like a second womb, you might say. So the child is going from a state where they're in direct experience with God to somehow navigating into a very loud type of environment. And it's very confusing to the child. The mother, through her protection, through her protective aura, through her radiance, through her example, can cover the child to such an extent in this period of time that the child will have a chance of developing their spirituality in the rest of their lives. Without this, normally the child is thrown into such a state of confusion. It makes it somewhat difficult. Let me go over to the value side of the equation. Let me know if I'm going too long here.
2 minutes.
Okay. In terms of values, in raising a spiritual child, we want them to be aware of the presence of God. That's the cornerstone of the values and the teachings and the theology. All of the additional gifts come after that feeling of the presence of God. And so in a Sikh tradition, we teach the kids meditation. We teach them singing the hymns of praise of God. And it's not different than in a Christian tradition or a Jewish tradition. I think you'd say it's very similar in that respect. In a Sikh tradition, we talk about avoiding the 5 sins: lust, anger, greed, pride, and attachment. So sexuality is contained within a family unit, primarily. It's not that we have a judgment whether sex is good or bad. It's that we have other things we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to provide a stable, focused environment for the child. And that's focused on his values. The child does not come as a plaything. He's not your pet. He's not your toy. You're there as his trustee. You're God's representative to assist this child. And he's not there as an emotional crutch. Commonly, people think of the child as a little cute thing, and yes, they're cute, but they're more than that. It's a being that comes in with their own destiny. It has to be fulfilled. It's related to the parent's destiny, but at the same time, separate from the parent's destiny. Okay, let me finish up because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I have a quick little list from one of our theologians in relationship to the teachings for the children. It said, love them, build self-esteem, challenge them, listen to them, expect respect from the children, limit them, make God a part of their lives, give them a sense of community, and then let them go. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third panelist has arrived. And so I want to introduce Mrs. Anita Rangaswami. And she helped me to understand her last name when she first introduced herself. Paul, just imagine you're on the telephone. You didn't ring a priest, you rang a Swami. So Anita Rangaswami has an electronics engineering degree from University in Bangalore, India, and then a Master of Business Administration from Arizona State. She has been active in all kinds of things here in the Valley for the last, I think, 28 years. She has 3 sons, and so she is here from the Hindu faith, in a Hindu position, apparently.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my honor to be here to share with you some thoughts on the Hindu culture, the tradition, as well as how we raise our children to make them good human beings, productive in society. So I've had a history of being here in Arizona for about 28 years now, and so my 3 boys, I have 3 wonderful sons, God bless them, and they have been a handful, but we've tried to do our best as we raise them, keeping up with some of the Hindu culture and the faith. So part of, when we think of the Hindu tradition, I think people might be familiar with the Bhagavad Gita. Has anybody heard of that? That is just akin to the Bible. It is the holy book of the Hindus. And so the children sometimes are too little to dive into that directly, but the way we try to train them is to start to inculcate a sense of godliness or a sense of spirituality in them by small little chants that they start to learn, like hymns. So just like you have a Sunday school and you go and have them learn some 4-lined kind of prayers, we teach the children some prayers. So they start to say that from when they may be even 2 or 3 years old. I remember my son not even knowing how to read from a piece of paper, but he would just start to say things, and because we would be saying it at home as well, he just started to learn to do that. Now I know these days, of course, because we're not so much in we're more nuclear families, so it becomes harder to have the parents' influence or the grandparents. In my case, of course, my parents lived in India, and so we would go to visit with them, and that's when the children had the exposure of being with their grandparents. Now, if they were raised in India, of course, this is all around them, and so they might pick up a little bit more from the environment as well, just like he was talking about osmosis. And that's how I think we grew up, is where you just picked up things because the culture allowed you to do that. Here we have to be a little more conscious of inculcating that in them. So the way we do that is to have them read into these little short stories. So there are a lot of little short stories with morals in them, and they've been made into wonderful pictorial books over the years. So that's another way we try to get the children to start to see the pictures, go with the stories, the morals, and then the little chants, etc., that help them to pick up things. So I think, in my case, I was born into a Brahmin family in India, so that's part of the whole culture, is to be have a certain sense of faith, tradition, spirituality, etc. And here, what we did initially about 28 years ago, because there were no organizations here at the time that could inculcate this kind of a tradition in them. So we as parents, going back to the role of the mother, I guess, in the family, which is a very pivotal role, and I see that that might be getting eroded a little bit. Not to say that education does that or going out and working. I've been a working mother all my life. And I couldn't see it any other way either. But I think it takes a lot of balancing and a lot of conscious decisions of prioritizing family versus work and back and forth in order to keep that balance and keep that semblance of sanity as well when you're raising 3 boys. But I think the point that I was wanting to make is that with the mother being the pivotal role, I think it helps for the mother to start to inculcate these values, especially in the children as well. And that's something that has been traditionally done in the Hindu culture as well. I think in terms of the extended families, I know we were going to touch upon that as well. I do find that that's a little hard to maintain these days, even in India, because of distances, the transportation issues, travel times, etc. So people are isolated in nuclear families. And so it does make it a challenge. However, I think because of the environment there, kids still pick up a little bit, and I know that's eroding as well over time. So we need to get all this straightened out across the board. I think in terms of tolerance, what we teach our children, the Hindu culture by nature is a very tolerant society. So there is no thought of any kind of conversion from any other religion to this religion, back and forth, or anything like that. So as a culture, I think, even though there are many different religions that live together in India, as a culture, we're a very tolerant society. And so what we teach our children as well is the basic tenets of love thy neighbor, no matter who they are. And so that's an important thing. And we put that across to them in the same way, is to have tolerance for everyone. And as the other gentleman was just talking about the importance of bringing a child into this world, I think that's considered to be a very sacred thing and has been in the past. So a part of the Hindu culture as well is to almost nourish the baby in the womb so that it's, and the parents used to try at least to do a lot of different activities to enable bringing in a very healthy, wholesome child into the world, and then nourishing that child so that they grow up to be devoted as well as can manage a regular, life or career, etc. So it's the emphasis is not just on the secular knowledge, which is all the math and the reading, etc., but there's also an emphasis in the spiritual knowledge. And and so that's part of the whole culture. So hopefully I covered everything that we wanted to do.
We've had a complementary with, in a sense, the academic professional proposals, and then we had a Sikh, and then a Hindu, and now a Christian person. So, well, so you just said, is he not a Christian? The question mark I have with him, so. So, reading from the bio that was sent to our office. Sybil Eppinger, a wife, mother of 4 grown daughters, and grandmother to identical twin boys. I don't know if I have to go any further than that. But anyway, Sybil was a Methodist missionary in the Philippines, an elementary school teacher, an adjunct college professor, and for 30 years a marriage and family therapist. Together with her husband, she hosted a weekly television program, half-hour television program on family issues for 11 years, and co-authored a book with him on marriage, titled which is "Every Minister Needs a Lover, Just Be Sure It's Your Spouse." She has served as president of the Phoenix unit of Church Women United. She was chosen the Arizona Mother of the Year for 2002 and named a legacy honoree for her contributions to ecumenism by the African Methodist Episcopal Women in 2004. So
I must say that some of the information that Paul just shared was not on the little bio that I sent in, but thank you. This is such a privilege. There's nothing more wonderful or more important in this world than parenting our children and doing it well. It's the career that more people are involved in than any other in the world, and it's the one for which most of us have the least preparation. So, having said that, we really, for the most part, most of us have, as our experience, just our own experience of being parented, as an example, and hopefully some other examples around us. Since one of the things we were to address today was how do you help a child develop in the faith that you yourself believe in. Not to disparage any other faith group, but if our own faith isn't the most important one to us, why would we be adhering to it? So we want to let our child know about that. However, if they choose a different path in life, I like what you said about recognizing that every individual's path is different and unique. And I think it's awfully important that we as parents be able to accept that our children may not have a path as similar to our own as we would like. Paul and I consider ourselves extremely blessed. Our 4 daughters who were raised in a Christian home are all active in Christian churches. But that is really rare for a lot of ministers' families. We know that. Many of them rebel and revolt, and yes, our children have expressed themselves in different ways through the years, not exactly the way that we would, but they are following. And I asked one of them a few years ago, what contributed to your continuing in the faith in which you were raised? And she said, well, there were several things that I can think of. One was that in our home you lived what Daddy preached about on Sundays. So that's what we experienced. We shared in devotions every single night at the dinner table. And in our home growing up, and I know that our culture is a bit different than when we raised our children years ago, but dinner in the evening was a command performance. We were all there. Of course, as the children got to be older teenagers and they had jobs, or they had part-time jobs, or they were involved in athletics at school or that sort of thing, they might miss a dinner. But for the most part, we were all there. And we shared in a devotional time, we called it, every night. We would have a Bible story that we read, and we would discuss it together. We also tried to listen to our children every evening at the meal. We would ask each person, what was the most important thing that happened for you today? If it was something wonderful, we would rejoice with them. If they were having difficulty with a friend, or they didn't think they had done well on a test that day at school, whatever, we would commiserate with them. But it gave us a bit of an insight into what was going on with our children. This became one of the most important things for Paul and me. Once when we were having our devotions, we we had a practice of doing, what do we call the prayer? Conversational prayer. Couldn't think of the title of it. Where usually Paul or I would start the prayer with thanksgiving, which is the way a lot of prayers begin for people. And then we expected each person to just chime in and talk about things they were thankful for, or pray for someone they knew who was having difficulties. And then, after we had sort of had a turn at it, someone would end the prayer. It was never predetermined who that was to be. One summer evening, when our children were elementary age, or at least the one I'm going to tell about was, Stephanie had been out playing with her friends. We lived in Pennsylvania at that time. There were no fences, there were no walls between the houses, the yards. The children in the neighborhood played across all the yards, up and down the backyards of the street, and just had a wonderful time together. We called our children in for dinner, and of course, the rest of their friends were still outside playing kick the can or whatever it was they were involved in. Ours came in, we had the meal, we had our story. Paul started the prayer with thanksgiving for the day and the experiences, and Stephanie piped up. She must have been about 8 years old or 9 at the time. She immediately piped up, the second one, who said, "Yes, God, we're so grateful that we could play and have a good time with our friends. In Jesus' name, amen." And because we had the practice of allowing anyone to end the prayer, we just said, amen. And they were free to run back out and play with their friends. So they expressed themselves. They followed our example. The other thing, the daughter that I asked what helped contribute to your staying in our faith, she said it was the community of faith that we were a part of. There were so many adults who knew our names, who knew what we were involved in, who showed an interest in us, and support for us, and it was just a loving community. She said there may have been a lot of difficulties, but what we experienced was really love and support. And that said to me, each of us, I'm looking at this crowd, and I think most of us have done our parenting if we have children. They are grown and out of the home by now. But if we can be supportive of other parents, if we can be the kind of people who live their faith, who really do what we talk about and what we say, then we can make a contribution to everybody else's parenting. Because research has shown, the group in Minneapolis that did some real excellent research with about 12,000 teenagers a few years back, said that if there are 5 adults who know a child for at least 5 years and know the child's name and talk to them regularly, just saying, how are things going? How is school? Whatever you know about the child, you ask them about. Those children that have those 5 adults are 95% not involved in behavior that we wouldn't want. They don't get into crime, they don't get into drugs, they don't get into alcohol, they don't have unexpected or unwanted pregnancies. They become productive citizens. That means that it's not only the biological parents who have a responsibility. We need to learn the names of the children in our neighborhood, the children, of course, in our extended family, in our faith communities. We need to be the support of the parents and of the children and really be there for them. I agree with Hillary Clinton. It takes a village. It does. And our faith communities can be that village. I have so much more to say, but my husband tells me my time is up. I do have handouts that I brought. This one is from the one on the front, and there are several here stapled together. It's from the National Mental Health Association about what every child needs. There's one in Spanish, if anyone knows someone who might like that. It's interpreted in Spanish. But these are available if you want them to share with anyone else. Thank you very much.
Let me just say one thing, asking all of you, whatever your faith, I'd like to ask for your prayers. Youngest daughter, Anita, is a professor at St. Louis School of Law. Okay. And I remember that. And she's worked for the State Department, and she was stationed in Ukraine for 4.5 years or so. When she was writing her PhD dissertation, she had a Fulbright scholarship back in Ukraine for a year. And so her dissertation was on Ukraine. Anyway, she speaks Ukrainian and Russian fluently. But she went just last Friday, three days ago, went back to Ukraine to be there to support Ukrainians as they face the election this next Sunday. So I ask for